Hi everyone, I'm Shelley and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another reading of The Iron Republic by Richard Jameson Morgan, and today I'm going to be sharing Chapter 7. Then by all means let us dispense with the news, I pleaded with unfeigned earnestness. How would you like to be entertained then? She asked, turning to me. You can have an opera, lecture, or anything that is going on in the city. Perhaps you would like some music. The National Orchestra plays this evening in the Capitol, and you can have the full program or any part of it. I dearly love music, I replied, and what I have heard in this country has been remarkably fine, but swelling from mysterious tubes or bursting from great mechanical contrivances imparts a weirdness to it that serves to heighten the unreality of my present position and surroundings. Do you know, I said with a sincerity that made her burst out laughing, that I have pinched myself a great many times since I reached these shores in the endeavor to awake? Even now it would be no surprise to me to start and wake and yawn and open my eyes to find myself back in America and have my wonderful experience of the past year a dream. I dare say you would be highly gratified to awake at this very moment, she said, with just a shade of reproach in her voice. Oh, no, indeed, I cried with an impetuosity altogether out of keeping with the shortness of our acquaintance, at the same time rising hastily and approaching to where she stood by the mantel. I would not wake now for worlds. If it be, I said, repeating a fragment from one of her own poets that she had quoted at the table. If it be then that the seeming has more of beauty than the real, if only it be in dreaming I may find the land Leal, may I not continue dreaming? Were it not cruel to wake again? Is not bliss e'en in the seeming preferable to real pain? A blush overspread her face, making it even more beautiful than before, and I, too, flushed, feeling that I had gone too far for a rank stranger, as it were, from another world. Very well, she responded. I would much dislike to wake you as long as your dream is pleasant. Nevertheless, she added with a meaning glance, I shall reserve the privilege of dashing cold water on you whenever I deem it proper to rouse you to a consciousness of your real position. And turning, she walked over to the music stand and began to handle the sheets of music. This Parthian shot sobered me, and I begged her to remember the peculiarity of my situation, being as absolutely cut off from every female acquaintance on earth as if I had landed on another planet. Knowing only her mother and herself, and meeting them as the wife and daughter of a countryman, I begged pardon, if like the lonely emigrant who meets a compatriot in a strange land, I presumed too much on a short acquaintance. My words or manner evidently convinced her of my sincerity, for turning and advancing with a world of sympathy in her beautiful eyes, she extended her hand with the most frank cordiality, and as I grasped her fingertips, almost daring to raise them to my lips, she assured me that her love and admiration for her father made it quite impossible for any countryman of his to be a stranger, and begged me to consider her an old friend. The touch of her hand made my blood tingle, and the sweet candor of her manner made me feel quite at home again. What I was going to remark, I resumed, was that the mysterious and automatic manner in which this music, news, and other entertaining things you suggest comes to us heightens the unreality of my surroundings, and what I desired to make everything seem more real and less like an illusion was something to remind me of home and life as I had been accustomed to it. This, I presume, is a musical instrument, said I, advancing to the piano, and if you will be kind enough to play something yourself, I will enjoy it more than all the orchestras in the world, over a wire or through a tube. Without a moment's hesitation she complied, and sitting down to the instrument, she played several pieces with great skill and expression. Noticing a number of songs among the music, I asked her if she would sing. She consented, but asked me to waive my objections to the automatic and mysterious tube, as she preferred a violin obbligato to playing her own accompaniment. Selecting a piece of music, she approached the general utility telephone, and pressing a button, asked somebody, somewhere, for the obbligato to the song, giving the title. In a moment, soft and low like the sighing melody of an Aeolian harp, came the prelude to the accompaniment, and then in a voice full, round, and sweet, she rendered the song, the obbligato swelling and sinking and blending with the rich tones of her cultivated voice, as though it were played by a master in the very room where we stood. Mrs. Morris entered the room while she was singing, and when the song was finished, at the request of her daughter, joined with her in a duet, her fine contralto voice blending beautifully with the other's soprano. At its conclusion I was asked for an American song, and as a fairly good baritone voice was the one single accomplishment I had been proud of at home, I complied and sang "Rocked in the Cradle of the Deep," while Miss Morris played an accompaniment. I acquitted myself quite creditably, and was gratified when they both admitted that no finer song had been composed in the Iron Republic. When Mrs. Morris reappeared after dinner, she too was attired in evening dress made similar to her daughter's, though somewhat plainer, of some pearl gray stuff that was extremely becoming. Upon my risking a cautious compliment on her appearance, the conversation turned on the subject of dress, and I soon became aware that woman is woman the world over, be the surroundings of what they may. I described to them the latest modes of dress in my country, and then there was the inevitable comparison between the different styles of the two countries. When I ventured a rough guess at the number of articles of apparel and adornment one of our fashionable ladies would wear at one time, they threw up their hands in horror and wondered how they had time for anything else but to dress and undress. I expressed my decided preference for the Ironian style, as illustrated by their charming costumes, but told them frankly that it would not be tolerated in my country. "And pray what would be the objections to it?" asked my hostess. "To be perfectly plain with you, madam," I replied, "it would be considered that is, immodest." "But why?" "Because, my dear madam, that is to say, I am delighted with it myself, and can conceive of nothing more becoming," I stammered. "I am very glad," said Mrs. Morris, "but why should this style of dress be considered immodest in your country?" "Because, madam, if you will have it," I answered under protest, "it admits of too much exposure of the person." "Then in the world you came from, one object of woman in dressing is to conceal the beauty of form which nature has bestowed upon them?" "Yes, madam, that is, it seems so." "Modest ladies attired as we are in a drawing room would blush and be embarrassed?" "Most undoubtedly, madam, at first. And yet on the stage, where the most beautiful and artistic effects are aimed at, this style of dress is employed?" "That is true, madam. It is also true that at the bathing resorts, where the sexes are thrown into the closest juxtaposition, only the rudiments of even the Ironian style are worn." Now I will ask you candidly, Mr. Barrington, can you conceive of any more reason why the female form, which artists insist is the most perfect work of creation, should be disguised or concealed, than there is that the symmetrical proportions of a horse should be hidden under skirts, or a beautiful statue covered from the head down with a blanket? Smiling at the forceful illustration of my hostess, I replied that I could not, though if crooked-legged horses and thin-shanked, imperfect statues could influence the fashion, even horses and statues might wear clothes. "No doubt of it," exclaimed my hostess. "And I seem to remember one of good old Aesop's fables about a fox who was unfortunate in the matter of his caudal appendage. May it not be, too," she continued, "that the fashion of concealment owes its origin to sentiments and feelings exactly the reverse of modesty? Is, after all, the revelation of such beauty as the female figure possesses any more suggestive than its concealment when such beauty is known to exist under the disguise? Indeed," she went on, warming up with the subject, "the commissioners excluded a most beautiful statue from one of our parks because of the indecent suggestion of the drapery. Here we wear 3 or 4 garments and combine comfort, beauty, grace, and utility. In your country women wear a dozen or more, and the most complimentary thing I can say of them after studying their pictures is that some are not as ugly as others. I'll dare say if Eve had come forth from the shady bowers of Eden and had met her lord and master dressed in the modern American fashion, the poor man would have scaled the fence and left the garden of his own accord." I laughed heartily at this sally, and looking slyly at me, Miss Morris observed that her mother must have some good reason for feeling so strongly on the subject. "Oh, I make no secret of it," retorted her mother good humoredly. "I was once prevailed on by Professor Morris to array myself in all the glory of the American fashion, as it prevailed when he left there, and appeared in public full rigged, hoop skirt and all. Ugh! It makes my cheeks burn yet to think of it. Seeing a crowd beginning to follow us, I ran into a house and begged the lady for the love of heaven to hide me while my husband called a carriage. I was taken home in hysterics and literally tearing the flounces and frames from my person. I held them over a flame till the last shred fell into ashes. That is all but the wire in the hoop skirt. That the professor buried, and with it the last hope of making an American woman of me. It was weeks before I could muster courage to go on the streets again. Since then, my husband has admitted that his preference for American dress only extended to me, and that for all other women he thought the style of the country much prettier and more desirable. Ah, well, he has gotten over all that now, she concluded, as you will in time. I assured her that I was already well over it, and in the matter of female dress, if nothing else, I was an iron Republican to the core. Professor Morris arrived in the midst of a general laugh and remarked pleasantly that it did not appear that I was being ostracized as an alien. He then informed us that he had learned while out that there would be an especial attraction at the Capitol that evening in the person of Madame Shafton, who was to sing her latest song, and had asked an usher from his office to connect us when her turn came. Madame Shafton, I was told, was considered the finest singer in the Republic and a composer of rare merit besides. Indeed, I was informed that in musical circles it was hardly considered good form for a person to play or sing anything except their own compositions, the exceptions being in the case only of music of extraordinary merit. In the midst of a general conversation some 10 minutes afterward, a sudden hum of voices penetrated the room from the transmitter, and then clearly and distinctly came the words, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to bring forward one who is known and honored from one end of the Republic to the other, and who has always been a deserved favorite at the Capitol." Then, during the applause which followed, very much in the American fashion, Miss Morris ran to the transmitter and pulling out certain stops, drew what appeared to be a ground glass screen before it. At the same time, she turned off the lights, leaving us in the dark, except for a pale light, which illuminated the screen from the transmitter. This grew brighter, and then I saw, like a stereoscopic projection, what appeared to be an arena railed off in the pit of a great amphitheater, and in this arena an orchestra, and in front of it, facing the audience, a tall and remarkably fine-looking woman. She was dressed in a loose flowing robe in the style of the classical Greek period, with wide sleeves and bound loosely about the waist with a knotted cord. She wore sandals on her feet and a wreath of flowers on her head. The song was rendered and encored, the whole performance being as distinctly audible and visible to us as if we had been in the auditorium. After it was over and the transmitter had been adjusted to cut off any further proceedings, I asked if the people in the city generally were connected with these places of amusement, and was informed that everybody in the city and country was thus connected, who elected to pay for the service. If then anybody may enjoy these entertainments in their homes, where do the audiences come from? I inquired. My dear sir, answered my host, if it were not for these arrangements, it would be impossible to accommodate our people without greatly increasing the number of places of public entertainment. As it is, there is always a certain number who attend, for notwithstanding the perfection of our system of transmission, it is still more satisfactory to be present in person. I learned on inquiry that this extensive system, which pervaded the entire Republic, was established by the government along with electric lights and railroads. This particular branch of it, though it had been found expedient to let to private individuals in the different cities and communities, the system being let to the bidder guaranteeing the cheapest service. I was also informed that public entertainments of every kind were provided by the government without direct cost to the people, most of the great orators, actors, and musicians being pensioned by the state. As a result of this, said my host, poor artists do not afflict the public, and good ones are not at the mercy of avaricious managers and irresponsible newspapers. I found afterward that the greater part of these artists were trained in the government conservatories, to which they had been sent from the public schools on account of extraordinary talents and aptitude. Those who became really great artists were but on a pension for life, if not forfeited by misconduct. There was no compulsion about it, however, and those who passed the examinations could renounce their pensions and try their fortunes in a private career, while those who failed to pass could do the barnstorming business to the top of their bent. It occurred to me that real merit might sometimes suffer in the presence of a pull, as we say here. But my host told me that the veriest barnstormer could have any auditorium in the country on petition of patrons, and if he could convince the people that he had merit, they had the power to have him put on the pension list. Anyway, it must be a terrible drain on the revenues of the government, I ventured to remark. On the contrary, replied my host, less money than the United States squanders on ambassadors and consuls sent to foreign countries to serve the traders and protect the interests of those who have expatriated themselves, provides this great people with the most elevating and instructive diversion that human ingenuity has been able to devise. It had now grown quite late, and as I was very much fatigued after a day of such remarkable experiences, I was not sorry when Mrs. Morris suggested to her husband that it was long past their usual hour of retiring. My host and family were religious people, and we stood with bowed heads while in a few impressive words he returned thanks for the day and invoked the divine care and protection for the night. I was conducted to a pleasant room and retired immediately, but though utterly tired out, it was long before I slept. Again and again I asked myself if this could be real, and tried to recall a formula I had read somewhere for demonstrating an illusion. The panorama of the day's events, crowned and illumined by the glorious face of Helen Morris, passed before my mind's eye like some old medieval picture in which the lustrous face of the Madonna appears, irradiating the whole. Awake or dreaming, I felt that I had met my destiny, and that to be awakened from such a dream would be the crudest prank that fortune could play upon me. And then I went back in imagination to my home in America, and tried to recall each event from the beginning of my strange experiences, linking them together and so connecting them down to the present. It could not be an illusion. And yet, as a practical man, I could not but admit to myself that it was in some respects remarkably dreamlike. Here I was, a bachelor of 26, who had met some of the most beautiful women in America without having my heart even touched, and yet I was already deeply involved with the first and only young woman I had met in this wonderland, and after an acquaintance of only a few hours. How long I lay awake I know not, but as exhausted nature began to yield, I found myself wondering if there was really such a place as the Iron Republic, or Barrier Passage, or a ship named the Wanderer. And then I started violently 2 or 3 times as I felt myself precipitated from the flying train on which I had ridden that day, or imagined that I was falling from a runaway aeroplane miles and miles above the earth. When I awoke the next morning, it was with the sound of music in my ears and the first rays of the rising sun shining in at my window. As I listened to the all pervading harmony that seemed to swell out over the landscape in every direction, I opined from the grand and stately measure that it was a kind of hymn or anthem, evidently played on some great mechanical instrument at a high elevation. I arose and went to my window, but I could by no means make out from what direction the sweet sounds came. Though I had retired quite late the night before, and it was earlier than I was in the habit of rising, I felt very much refreshed. I could perceive from the invigorating and bracing air that the capital must be located on a high plateau, for the atmosphere had all the crispness of mountain air. The view from my window was different from what I had ever seen in any city before. Instead of a dreary waste of housetops ornamented with clothes horses and chimney flues as far as the eye could reach, I saw pretty cottages of brick and stone surrounded by spacious gardens and grounds. As I looked over these highly cultivated tracts, I thought of what I had read of ancient Babylon, that enough provisions could be raised within its walls with what was stored to withstand a siege of 20 years. The music which had awakened me continued for some 5 minutes, and then ceased and died away in the distance like the musical cadence of a deep-toned bell. Dressing, I went down into the sitting room, and finding no one there, walked out on the veranda. My friend's house stood in the midst of quite extensive grounds, which, with the exception of the flower garden about the house, was set in vines and fruit trees. As I looked down through a labyrinth of green, I caught the glimpse of a scarlet figure, and though I could but see the flashes of color through the intervening foliage, something in the free and graceful movement told me that it was the daughter of the house. With my heart beating as it never did at the sight of any woman before, I descended from the veranda, and picking my way through the dew-laden grass, I approached her. She did not see me, as her face was turned the other way, and I had the opportunity of admiring her beautiful form in another garb and with different surroundings. She wore a knitted scarlet jersey that fitted perfectly and was belted about the waist with a hempen girdle. Below the girdle it broadened into a skirt that fell gracefully to the tops of the waterproof boots of oiled canvas that buttoned quite up to the knees. The tight-fitting sleeves covered her wrists, and the turned-up collar completely hid her white neck and throat. Her hair fell in tresses to her waist, and but for the jaunty straw hat that surmounted the whole, she would have been almost a facsimile of an American Indian maiden as they are pictured in the old school books. She was picking grapes, and as I came up she turned and greeted me with a smile. I had wondered when I came out if she would appear as enchanting under the severer ordeal of daylight and sunshine as she had the night before, and the first glance showed her to be even more so. Her cheeks were as rosy as a sun-kissed peach, and her deep brown eyes seemed to have caught an opaline tint from the morning sky. Although she looked so charmingly fresh and beautiful that had I dared I would probably have made a fool of myself. As I feasted my eyes on the fresh loveliness of her face, she blushed slightly and looked down into the basket she carried on her arm. "You are an early riser," I said, taking the basket from her and pulling down the vine from which she had been picking grapes. "It is our custom to rise with the sun," she replied. "I am glad to find that you did not wake up in America this morning." "If I had," I said, looking into her face so ardently that her eyes fell before mine, "I should have been the most miserable man in that country." "Did you wake in time to hear the matin?" she asked, lightly, as if to give another turn to the conversation. "Do you mean that grand music that seemed to pervade everything?" "Yes, that is the matin, and is placed every morning at sunrise." "Did you like the music?" "Indeed, I thought it was magnificent." "Oh, thank you," she said with a gratified smile. "It was by a very dear friend of mine, and I am so glad you like it." "Indeed!" I exclaimed. "And who is this accomplished friend?" "Professor Hallam of the National Conservatory." Those few words robbed the sun of half its brightness, and the world of half its charm to me. Even the grape that I had put into my mouth seemed to lose its sweetness. After all, this brilliant creature had a very dear friend, and what interest could she possibly take in me further than to indulge a generous sympathy for a wandering and lost man without a people and without a country? "Does he play this hymn every morning?" I asked. "Oh, no, indeed. As a rule, he improvises a new piece every morning, and never plays the same one 2 days in succession, unless there are special requests for it to be repeated." "He must be a wonderful man," I remarked, "to improvise such wonderful music. But it is more wonderful still that he should be able to repeat such improvisations afterward." "He doesn't do that," she answered. "Everything that is played on the grand harmonium is by a mechanical device, registered, that is, a copy of the music is made and can be preserved." "And is this matin, as you call it, a public function?" I inquired. "Entirely so," was the reply. "It was instituted by Professor Hallam when he was called to the head of the conservatory. It was his idea, and these matins and nocturnes are his fad, if I may employ an American term I heard you use last night, but a most beautiful one nevertheless." "Where does this music come from?" I asked, looking around for its probable source. "And how far can it be heard?" "It is played from the dome of the conservatory, and can be heard for many miles around, when the weather is favorable," she answered. In reply to my further question if it was a function that was performed in all parts of the Republic, I was informed that it was a purely local affair originating with Professor Hallam, but that quite a number of cities and communities had adopted it, and it was obtaining great favor with the people. "From his position and ability, this Professor Hallam must be, that is, quite an old man," I ventured blunderingly. "I would judge him to be about your age," she answered with an arch smile. "I do not know how you reckon your age in America, but it is not considered distressingly old in this country." My heart turned to lead as she went on to speak of his great genius, his wonderful compositions, and his national fame. It sank like the mercury in a Dakota blizzard. She told me with an evident glow of pride that he had taken a special interest in her, and that she was indebted to him for what little knowledge of music she possessed. I heard all this with pretty much the same feelings that the condemned man hears the judge, in long drawn judicial platitudes, depict the enormity of his crime. It was plainly to be seen that she greatly admired this musical prodigy, if nothing more. Noticing my downcast look, she rallied me by asking what I thought of her working dress. I felt like telling her that Mother Eve's dress of fig leaves would be gorgeous if only she wore it, but simply remarked that I thought it very pretty and convenient. She told me that this style of dress was worn by the women and girls generally, for walking and outdoor work. A call from Mrs. Morris interrupted us, and saying that her mother wanted the grapes for breakfast, my companion led the way to the house. Arriving there, she took the basket, and telling me that I would probably find her father in the library, she passed into the kitchen through the back door. On entering, I was warmly greeted by my host, and in a few minutes breakfast was announced. The meal was simple but most excellent, consisting chiefly of cereals with butter, milk, and fruit. Coffee was also served. After a short invocation by the head of the house, we took our places at the table in the same order as the evening before, and without the slightest pretense at formality or ceremony, the breakfast was served. After a few minutes' conversations, mostly referring to my impressions of my surroundings, Professor Morris remarked that it was their custom, in lieu of conversation, to take the current news during the meal hour, especially at breakfast. He was a very busy man, he said, and tried to dispose of the day so as to get the most out of it. Then, at the request of her father, Miss Helen rose and going back into the front room manipulated the telephone in some way and returned to the table. Almost immediately a voice began to speak, apparently from overhead, and looking up I noticed another transmitter in the center of the ceiling similar to the one in the front room. Clear and distinct came the words, as if a good reader was reading from the columns of a newspaper. Ironia, 7 o'clock. Morning resume. And then followed general news reports from every part of the Republic, agricultural and government reports, local news items, and in general the matter which goes to make up the news pages of our daily papers. There was a condensed account of the voyage of the Wanderer from an interview with Captain Brent, and an item stating that I was the guest of Professor Morris of the Naval College. We lingered at the table some minutes after the meal was concluded to get the sum of this resume, and it was still continued after we left the room. We had gotten all of the current news, though, and my host could not spare the time to take the literary review which followed. For an hour or two more, I was informed this resume would continue, giving out reviews, essays, poetry, fiction, humor, and purely literary matter of every description, which the ladies enjoyed at their morning work. And that is all for chapter 7. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one down below. And if you like my work and would like to check out my channel membership and become a channel member, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. Or you can just click on it right on my channel page. And I hope you have a great day.